Hey guys, can you hear me? How's everybody doing tonight? We are going to talk about sustainability, which is a really important topic in environmental science, and I hope you guys ask a lot of questions. Think about us on social media, think Fiveable. I know like the Olympics just started, the Fiveable Olympics, so check that out. But let's focus on what we're going to talk about tonight. So we're going to define sustainability. I'm going to go through some examples of practices that are sustainable. Then we're going to talk about sustainable yield. I'm going to go into ecological footprints and takeaways. Don't forget to ask your questions in the little ask a question thing, and I'll ask you some questions too. This topic is in Unit 5. If you're going according to the College Board course and exam description, it has to do with how we use the resources of our planet. So the Unit 5 is called Land and Water Resources. All right, let's dig a little deep and define sustainable. It's a pretty important idea for APES. It's one of the big ideas, which means that it connects many other topics into a theme. And so like APES wants you to know things, they want you to know stuff, but more importantly, they want you to know how it all fits together. And sustainability is how we bring ecology and population ecology and energy and water resources, biogeochemical cycles, and human patterns and population all together. So what do you think of when you hear the word sustainable? Let's do a brain dump in the chat if you're with me. Don't be shy. Got to work. We've got to start where we are. Okay, conservation. That's a good start. They probably go hand in hand together. I know there's one other person here. Who are you? Don't be shy. Let's get some ideas out there. Let's look at the context clues. If I keep working 16 hours a day, I'm going to get sick or collapse. It's unsustainable. So what does unsustainable mean in that sense? Your current spending is unsustainable. You're going to burn through your savings if you don't stop buying new shoes. Yes, you can't continue it. You can't keep doing the same things over and over again. So to sustain something, like to sustain a note on the piano, or to sustain a certain level of rating in chess, or to sustain a certain pace in a marathon, means to keep it going at that level. And so sustainability means we're able to keep doing everything we're doing forever, or at least for future generations. So this big idea is right there in the course and exam description, and it's defined as such. Human survival depends on developing practices that will achieve sustainable systems. So they're saying all humans. A suitable combination of conservation, there you go, Dakota, conservation is part of it, and development is required. We got to develop because our population is growing. The management of resources is essential. So there's also the word management and resources in there. Understanding the role of cultural, social, and economic factors is vital to the development of solutions. So it's often easier to think of systems and practices that are unsustainable because that's how we do things. As Americans, on average, we spend money unsustainably. We use fossil fuels unsustainably, right? That's why we're going to run out of fossil fuels eventually. Can you think of a practice that humans do that is environmentally unsustainable? What do you think makes it sustainable? Unsustainable. Let's get the brainstorm going. Okay, absolutely. Landfills, right? And more specifically, what makes it unsustainable? We're taking land that could be a habitat and support biodiversity, and we're filling it with solid waste that doesn't decompose. So we're losing those soil resources, and we never stop making garbage. So that is a really, yes, contaminating landfills. So that is a great example of an environmental problem. We're doing things in it's an unsustainable way to consume goods, right? Using perfectly good land, even when you put a filler on the bottom and you contain it, even when you recycle the methane gas, which is a great thing to do in a landfill. And that is from our unit that we don't get to do, Unit 8, which I love because it kind of brings a lot of things together for us. This is an example of how we know we're doing things unsustainably. This is, does anyone know what this is an example of? This is a result, that's soil. Yes, and here's a vocabulary word for you, desertification. Desertification, or the becoming of a desert, is how we know our current agricultural practices are unsustainable, because the topsoil has been removed and what we are left with underneath is the mineral soil with no nutrients. Even without climate change, our soil is becoming desertified or eroded or degraded. There's some good vocabulary for you. So yeah, just desertification is evidence that farming practices are not sustainable. So for 40% of this exam, they are going to ask you to write in an educated way, analyzing an environmental problem. If that problem is agriculture, you can talk about how you know the practices are unsustainable because we're losing arable land on a global scale, not able to feed people. That's not sustainable. And then we can go and talk about solutions like IPM, and we'll get into some of that in this live stream and others. All right. So there are some key indicators. Crop rotation. Yes, Dakota, crop rotation or intercropping. So how do we know? How do environmental scientists internationally agree that we are not living sustainably? Because, you know, I could think that it's sustainable for me to use a landfill because I don't notice in my house all the garbage that I put in the landfill doesn't affect me. So we're all interconnected. And so we have to look at global indicators of sustainability to understand the effects of us as individuals, as members of states and countries, and as members of continents, right? So these are the generally agreed upon indicators that we are not living sustainably. Biodiversity and extinction rates, you can see in this picture here, the first column is the distant past record, where we did have a lot of extinctions relatively over time, but then we go up, multiplying by a factor of 100. This is recent past known extinctions. So amphibians more recently in the past have experienced great extinctions, but this is the projected extinctions in our future, given the current rate that's happening now. So that is, we could point to direct cause or indirect cause. It's not sustainable. We need biodiversity. It's an ecosystem service. We need it for a lot of reasons, to be able to respond to climate change, for example. Food production, soil quality, and forest resources. We're going to look at that in a little bit. Average global surface temperature. This is a map from NASA of the last year's increase in rolling global average temperature. So you can see these in the key, these orange spots are +2 degrees, and that's that tipping point we talked about. And so the climate needs to be maintained in homeostasis for things to be sustainable, because of Unit 9, which we don't get to teach you, but think about it. We talked about it in adaptations, right? Ecosystems involve organisms that are adapted and function in a certain climate, and as that changes radically, we're going to have problems. Human population, and I talked about that a couple weeks ago. Energy and mineral resources, freshwater resources, all these things are running out or are in peril. So they tell us overall as an Earth, we're not living sustainably. So I'm going to take a poll. Which is the best choice that describes the word sustainable? And I'm just going to put A, B, C, D. There's not really people in here, but let's see what you guys think. Go ahead and vote. Can you guys see the poll? Yeah. Yeah. To use at a rate that will maintain the quality. You could also maybe say maintain the same level of quality. You could also maybe say to save for future generations. To limit the use of resources is not necessary if you're doing things in a smart way, if you're doing things with a full systemic, holistic understanding. So this was a little bit of a trick question. I was more trying to get your viewpoints. B and C are not wrong. They're not wrong. D is probably the best answer, so good job on that. But more, I just want to get a really clear picture of what is sustainable and what isn't in your head, so that you can point out things that are unsustainable. So in APES, we explore many new practices that are sustainable. In Unit 5, that's what I love about Unit 5, is we kind of look at these individual problems of how we use resources. And we look at examples of how they are unsustainable, and then we look at examples of how they are sustainable. Can you think of a practice in any of these categories that is sustainable? Can you explain why? And I want you to think for a minute, because I think this is important practice for writing an FRQ. Remember, environmental solutions is 40% of the test. So describing the problem, yes, but making a claim that proposes a solution and justifying it, which means we need to think about a solution, but we also need to explain and defend and justify why it is. Can you guys think of that? Do you remember anything from your studies about agriculture, forestry, fishing, mineral extraction, or urban development that might be a sustainable practice? Yeah, crop rotation. Yes, Dakota. Yeah, that is part of sustainable agriculture. Do you know why? Does anybody know why intercropping or polyculture, planting lots of things together instead of one thing, is more sustainable? Okay, because of biodiversity, for sure. You're going to have to go farther than that, though. You're going to have to kind of connect the dots, right? First of all, different plants use different levels of nutrients. Yes, it gets more nutrients, especially if, think about nitrogen fixation, right? If you are not just intercropping, but you are planting legumes. And because of biodiversity is a correct answer. But what we want to see be able to do is to say, if we have a diversity of plants, pests can't wipe them all out. If we have a diversity of plants, we'll have more of a diversity of soil bacteria and decomposers. Okay, and then here's another one, drip irrigation. We want to say, why is drip irrigation sustainable? Because water resources, fresh water only makes up less than 1% of the water on Earth, or available surface fresh water, prevents overwatering, correct? And then you want to connect that to the fact that fresh water is a limited resource. It's actually not fully renewable in and of itself, right? It takes thousands of years to renew the groundwater deep in the aquifers. And so I would take one of these as you, or two of them, and have them in your pocket and go down the line and say, why is this sustainable? Why is doing it another way unsustainable? And then ask yourself, because why? Because why? Like drip irrigation prevents overwatering. Why is overwatering unsustainable? Because water is a limited resource. Because why? Why? Because we only have a certain amount and it's in aquifers. It takes a long time to replenish. This way we prevent overusing water, okay? 70% of fresh water resources are used for agriculture. Great, there's some great ideas coming out. Contour plowing allows advantages of plowing while preventing water erosion, also maintaining the microbiome in the top soil. Remember, we need those decomposers in the topsoil. We need that organic matter to keep the water in. This is great. You guys got this. Yep, there you go. Okay, there's a lot of great knowledge here. Put it together for yourself in a link. Keep asking yourself, because why? Okay? All right. So sustainable agriculture, I will be giving a whole nother talk on May 6th, I think, about sustainable agriculture, especially IPM. It's a whole topic that I love. I studied it a little bit at Santa Cruz, University of California, Santa Cruz, and they had like an outdoor garden where we learned everything. All day long, we were just farming. It was amazing. So sustainable agriculture includes, but is not limited to, irrigation methods like drip irrigation or furrow irrigation, planting methods such as intercropping and polyculture. Also, like some of that stuff is indigenous knowledge. For example, planting beans, corn, and squash together, there are beneficial bacteria that help each plant thrive, and that is wisdom from the Mayans and the Aztecs. Organic fertilizers such as compost, vermicompost, worm compost, or regular compost, or using manure, creating more of that cycle of decomposers. Integrated pest management, which is a very complex topic, but the things you should know about it is it's a combination of biological and chemical controls. It's using hormones and understanding the reproductive cycles of those pests and using beneficial pests. Meat production, and how can we best produce meat for a growing population that isn't hugely impactful, or even given the 10% rule, is it sustainable? Yes. Is that where they introduce different types of pests? Absolutely. Yep. So like ladybugs eat aphids, for example. If you want to watch an amazing video, I can't find it for free, but it is just super heartwarming. And it's called The Biggest Little Farm. And it's on Amazon. And it is a really great example of people taking a land that was totally degraded and trying to start their own sustainable farm. It's totally adorable. I loved it. I wish I could find it for free, but I would highly recommend it. All right, so what do you guys think? I'm going to go back to the poll again. All right, why is sustainable agriculture so hard? Like, why isn't the whole world growing things that are organic? Why isn't all of our food organic? What do you guys think? A, B, D? All right, let's see. One vote from 7 people. 2 votes. Alondra's voting, and on the side we got 1 vote for B. It's too expensive to be profitable. 1 vote for C. It's too small scale to feed the world's growing populations. Okay, B could also be a better answer. Yeah. Does it take a lot? Once again, I'm trying to get a lot of ideas out there, trying to get your input. Does it take a lot of time to convert to sustainable agriculture? Absolutely. Like, you've got it's basically like getting somebody off of painkillers when they've been on painkillers for a long time. They've got to like adjust back. They're, the system that's been using chemical fertilizers or non-organic fertilizers has no microbiome. It has no soil biomes. Is everybody around you growing GMO and you've got to like protect your land and find and redevelop that indigenous seed? Absolutely. But it's not really the reason. Part of the reason is B and part of the reason is C. It is initially very expensive, and also most people are buying commercial. They're buying non-organic. They're not buying from sustainable farms. They're buying from agribusiness. And for agribusiness, mostly, it's too small. Sustainable agriculture is too small to feed the world's growing population. If you remember the Green Revolution and like using science and using chemical fertilizers and machines to like grow enough food for that growing population, that model was then forced upon the rest of the world, or not forced, but offered up as the solution to feed all this growing population. And so we're on the industrial model, and profit drives the industrial model, but that doesn't mean it can't be profitable. And you are seeing like some of the bigger companies starting to offer organic food as it becomes more in demand. It does work better small scale, because big scale is monoculture. All right. And think monoculture is the enemy of biodiversity. Enemy. But it's not enough to talk about that in your FRQs and be done with it. You've got to start explaining what is lost when you don't have a genetic diversity. You've lost your range of tolerance, your ability to adapt to diseases. Polyculture can be, Dakota, that is an amazing question. And I'm also going to look at this other question here. So why can't polyculture be large scale? I'm going to throw up a picture. Let's see. So monoculture and industrial agriculture uses large machines. Here's a good one. This makes it extremely efficient and really highly productive. And that's what defines industrial agriculture. Could you use a big combine if instead of all wheat, this was squash, beans, corn, squash, beans, corn, squash, beans, corn? Right. You get it? Okay. So I'm going to have a question here. What is polyculture? So mono means one. Poly means many. Polyculture means you are producing many things together. You are culturing, maybe you're growing grapes and peaches. Maybe you have an orchard that's many different varieties of apples. Maybe you're growing lettuce and you're also producing radishes, and you're not just growing one crop. You're growing many things together. So mono means one, poly means many. Great question. Keep them coming. The more questions, the better. You guys get out of it what you need. All right, forestry, alternatives to clear cutting. So before we go there, I want you to look at this map from a website called The World in Data. And it's moving from 1997 to 2000 to the present. Forest gained is in blue, and forest lost is in red. Where are we losing forests? Yes, and so economics is a part of it. But these are also biodiversity hotspots here around the equator. You know, La Selva, the jungle, right? The Amazon rainforest, the jungles in Africa. This belt at the equator is a biodiversity hotspot. So it affects sustainability for the whole world, that these countries are having huge population explosions, needing to create farmland to feed their people or sell their teak wood, sell their exotic woods, because it helps their country develop wealth. So there are options, but not all of these options help developing countries. The one that does, Australia's losing forests because of climate change in some ways, and also because of cattle ranging. The big pressure on land use in Australia is a huge production of beef. And you know, the forests they're actually losing now are not really forests, they're actually savanna or very complex grasslands, rangeland. And overgrazing is causing them to lose that vegetation. So if we live in the United States and we need timber, it's great to do selective harvesting, to just pick a couple trees while we can, or shelter wood cutting, cutting the smaller trees and letting the larger ones live, or salvage logging, only logging the trees that die or fall out. That kind of logging can still harvest the provisioning ecosystem services that we need. We need forest. I think I spelled provisioning wrong. Nope, I spelled it right. That would be fine. But if we are in developing countries, conservation easements and ecotourism are really good options. The conservation easements are when nonprofits go and say, we're going to pay your country $2 million to hold this much reserve of the Brazilian rainforest or of your jungle or of your boreal forest. Don't use it. We'll give you money. That's called a conservation easement. And use of public lands, establishing more public lands where you say, sorry, this belongs to the whole world. You can't cut there. So choosing the right solution for sustainable forestry is critical, thinking about the kind of country that it is. So we kind of already identified what the major pressures on Brazil are that are provoking that recent increase in deforestation. If you looked at the population pyramids with me, even though their population growth is slowing down, at the height of this deforestation was a huge population growth, needing to feed more people, agricultural land, a shift to beef because some people were gaining more income. Shelter wood cutting and selective harvesting are more sustainable because, what do you think? All right, I'm going to put this in a poll and I'm going to describe them. And you think about it. More importantly, I'm giving you these options in the slide because they're at the level that are descriptive enough. So shelter wood cutting is where you cut certain trees, but you still live bigger trees to provide shelter so that seedlings can grow underneath them. So you're selectively harvesting, but you're leaving some of the oldest trees the longest and taking the younger trees. Selective harvesting is a bigger category that includes shelterwood cutting. But selective harvesting is you may take smaller trees, bigger trees, but you're spreading out where you're harvesting those trees so that you're not decimating the whole forest, but you're leaving an understory, you're leaving an old growth story, you're leaving a canopy that will shade plants on the forest floor. So I kind of just gave you the answer. But what do you guys think? A, B, or C? We got 1 vote for A, 2 votes for A, 3 votes for A, all right. 3 out of 3 ain't bad. It's definitely not reduce the yield of timber, although they do reduce the yield of timber. You're not taking the whole forest at once. Remember, doing things unsustainably is profitable. That's why we do it that way, not because people are evil or whatever, like, you know, just like the guy in the Lorax, right? Like, he didn't mean to be like that. He just was greedy. And I'm not saying wanting to make a profit is greedy. I think that's a political issue, but help maintain a diverse habitat? Absolutely. So if you're going to offer a sustainable forest technique as part of your FRQ and explain and justify why it's sustainable, you need to talk about the fact that the entire, yes, great question. I love good questions. So aquaculture is an example of sustainable agriculture. It's just that you're harvesting fish. Yeah. And there's problems with aquaculture as well. You want to look at the advantages and disadvantages. I'm not going to talk about aquaculture. I'm not a big expert about it. I will say it's the idea of a fish farm instead of overfishing. I get you, Alondra. Aquaculture is basically fish farming, right? It's like, think about a cattle ranch instead of hunting all of our meat for wild animals, right? Up until aquaculture, we fished in the ocean. And in doing that, we impacted the ecosystem of the ocean in a profound way by overfishing. If we grow the fish ourselves, either in a contained farm, like where we build tanks, or in a contained area in the ocean, we can control and balance that ecosystem without having larger impacts. What do you think, Alondra? Does that build your understanding a little bit? Yeah, okay, good. But let's talk about cities, because I know a lot about cities. So urban development, my pleasure, by the way. Please ask questions. You'll get the most out of this review. So urban development is part of that Unit 5. It's like huge. There's a huge diversity in how we use resources, everything from agriculture to fishing to mining, and including how we use space, urban development. And so the current patterns of how we use cities are not very sustainable. Does anybody know why? I mean, it seems like it would be more efficient if we all pack together and we don't spread out and take over all the wild lands. We leave lands wild and like hunker down together. It's more efficient. But what's the problem with it? Well, technically, we actually need less resources in some ways. It's more efficient to get everything in one place, right? But we also concentrate our waste, right? And then we have to treat our waste. The biggest issue is transportation. Okay? There's also problems like urban heat islands. Well, because instead of biodiversity. Biodiversity if we all live in one place than if we spread out all over the land because we're leaving habitat. But highways cause habitat fragmentation. So there is a good association there. Habitat fragmentation, right? Like a freeway leading up to a city cuts a piece of wildland in half, and now you've got Mr. Bear over there and Mrs. Bear over there, and genetic diversity suffers a great deal. That's why we can build wildlife transit corridors. We can build bridges over big freeways. The real issue, a lot of the big issues with cities is transportation and sprawl, urban sprawl. We also need to think about urban heat islands and air pollution, right? Air pollution becomes concentrated and a health issue. What do you think? What do you think? Do we want to spread out that city? What happens to your transit time when your city gets bigger? It sprawls out. What happens to your transportation time? Right. So if you're longer in the car, then we have more air pollution. So some solutions to put in your back pocket, if we're talking about the issue of cities and their impact on the environment, is setting something called an urban growth boundary. And Portland, Oregon did a really good job with this. They were starting to sprawl. That was causing congestion on their freeways. That was causing more people to drive, and public transit couldn't support it. People had like an hour commute. And so they started to say the city cannot grow bigger than this. And we're not going to support city services outside this urban growth boundary, but we're going to build transit-oriented development. Like this is transit-oriented development. People are living right in a place where there's a walkway right into public transit, and there's apartments above it. There's a lot of really great models for transit-oriented development. Green roofs. Here's a bike rack that has plants growing on it, so you're providing more habitat. Well, both ways have their own problem, but I think everybody would agree smaller cities with less sprawl are more sustainable. Cities that sprawl are less sustainable because of transportation and also because of habitat loss, right? We've lost wildlands. So I would disagree and say both have their own problems, but you could argue it. And I think, there may be advantages to having suburbs or having smaller villages connected from one center. Green buildings that have really low energy use, LEED certified buildings as one. LEED is the larger, okay. It's a certification that buildings can have if they're built super energy efficient and built out of recycled materials. And they have to use less energy. They have to be super energy efficient. Green roofs, so you're taking away habitat and to build a building and putting concrete, but then you're putting that green roof on the roof of the building, so it's still a habitat for birds. And you can grow things on that. That can help keep your building cooler. That can help reduce the urban heat island. This is a building that has wind turbines in the top of the building. So it generates, this building's in Japan. It generates its own energy because the turbines are within the building. So you can think really creatively about this is one thing. I'm always just astounded by how people who are trying to build habitat for humans are doing it in new and more sustainable ways. All right, let's talk about sustainable yield. As far as we understand, there is no math on the exam. However, you may be asked to look at graphs and understand those graphs. Sustainable yield, or maximum sustainable yield, is the maximum harvest, the total, the most possible fish or organisms I can catch, or organisms I can hunt, or things I can pick out of the forest, that will be replaced by natural population growth. Yes, Dakota, an urban heat island is the effect of when we pave cities and now we no longer have infiltration or transpiration. Our cities have a marked rise in temperature from the surrounding suburbs. Absolutely. That's a good thing to study about cities. The other thing I would say about cities is solid waste. It's a big issue. And more importantly, storm water runoff. Big problem, because when we pave things, infiltration goes down, right? Or doesn't go down anymore, right? Rainwater runs off instead of going into the soil, runs off asphalt and takes pollutants with it. And then we have huge pollution pulses. And here's another question about hunting season. Yes, hunting season is one way that the Department of Fish and Game try to maintain a sustainable population of wildlife. Is they say we're going to give out this many licenses. We're going to do it during this season, not during mating season, right? Because that would affect genetic diversity. And that is how they control the sustainable yield of elk or the sustainable yield of deer or whatever you're hunting. Here in Colorado, people hunt elk quite a bit and deer. So how do you scientifically determine this maximum sustainable yield? The maximum sustainable yield is half of the carrying capacity. It's K divided by 2. And the reason why is when you're at the sustainable yield, if you catch any more than that, the population will decline. If you catch that amount, you can stay up here on this curve. If you're catching here, it actually could accelerate the population growth. All right. So the reason why is when you look at this logistic growth, where is the population, the reproductive rate, the population growth rate, the highest? It's the highest, but halfway to the carrying capacity. If we're at carrying capacity, the growth rate slows down. So if we have a fish population that's reached their carrying capacity and we fish them, well, they're not reproducing very quickly at that point. So they're not going to replace themselves because they've leveled out and reached that limiting factor, and we're a new limiting factor. Okay, so when populations are smaller than here, they're dying of old age and could be caught without depleting the stock. So we're good anywhere below here, right? The population will still grow. At K divided by 2, that's the maximum sustainable yield. That's the most we can catch because the growth rate is fast enough. And at a higher yield, organisms caught would have to reproduce to this yield, and it will cause a population to decline. All right. I think you might be asked to look at a maximum sustainable curve and be able to identify that anything over that K divided by 2, the growth rate is too slow to replace that population. So you might also be asked, how do we encourage fisher people and harvest to hunter sustainably? Again, pulling out and defending that sustainable solution. Catch limits can be enforced. There's problems though, because who owns the ocean? International waters and international agreements about these catch limits, and there's people who break those rules, and maybe we don't have money to enforce them. There's pros and cons to enforcing a catch limit across international boundaries. And Dakota already brought up hunting season, and that is why it would be amazing to be a wildlife biologist, because you could have a say in studying the population of those animals that are hunted every year and making sure that you're establishing those licenses at the right level. You're not giving too much permission or too little permission, and you've got to adjust year to year based on the climate and what else is happening in terms of those resources. In my next life, I'm going to be that. Ecological footprints. If everyone lived like the average US citizen, how many people could the Earth support? Take a wild guess. I could make a poll again. I'm going to make a poll. I'm having fun with the poll thing. All right. I have to say US citizens. If I say Americans, that implies all continents. So I'm going to say 7 billion, maybe 4 billion, maybe 1.5 billion. What do you think? Can everybody live like us? Maybe 400 million? Because that's almost how many Americans there are. What do you guys think? I'm talking about the average habits of people who live in the United States. Any votes? Can you guys see the vote thing? 0 votes for any. Oh, weird. Okay, hold on. There it is. Can you see it now? Thanks for letting me know. Can you see it now? Yeah, there we go. Some people knew the answer. Let's see. Anybody got an opinion? 4 billion. Okay, remember there's 7.8 billion people on Earth right now. 400 million. That would be the population of the United States. Yeah. Yeah. The current world population is 7.78 billion. I checked it yesterday. About 1.5 billion people. So we can't all do that. It's not fair, right? We all grow up with different amounts of wealth or ability to use the environment. But if you looked at biocapacity, places where people are not using resources are places where resources are coming from. So it's inequitable. But how do we measure that? How do we know that it's 1.5 billion people? And we do that by calculating something called an ecological footprint. We figure out what this carrying capacity or biocapacity of the Earth is. And ecological footprint is the amount of biologically productive land and water needed to supply the people with resources to absorb and recycle the waste and pollution produced by such resource use. So it is not just land area that we need to grow our food. It's not just land area that we need to mine for our energy. It's our carbon footprint. It's the space we take up. It's all of these things together calculated in a way that most environmental scientists agree about. It's a kind of, it's a theory, right? You could argue it's not accurate. You could study it, but it is one method. The other method is the IPAT method, which is, IPAT is not something I think you're going to be tested on, but we used to talk about it. Population times affluence times technology. But the footprint method is really well agreed upon, and we use it to compare different countries and to talk about the equity and justice of how we're using the world. It's measured in hectares. 1 hectare is 10,000 square meters. That's a little larger than a football field. And the Earth has, when we calculate the land area of biologically productive land that can give us minerals and food and water and clean our water and provide enough biodiversity and lumber and all the things we need, it's about 11.3 billion usable hectares of land. So how much does that leave per person? Well, APES said they were going to make you do any math, but I wonder if you want to, if you don't want to. It's about, whoops, go back. Didn't I tell you? It's about 1.88 hectares per person. It's about 1.8 hectares per person. What you do is you divide that 11.3 billion by 7.8 billion, and you get about 1.8 hectares per person. So this sustainability problem was noticed in the 70s when environmental activists saw there was really a lot of trends in using a lot of energy and pollution. This is when the possibility of climate change was first identified, and they knew there was a sustainability problem. At that point, our global footprint per person was less than 1 planet. So we were not using up all of the resources. And then look at how fast it happened. Okay, here we are way over here. We're currently using up 2.3 Earths total as a global people. So we're not using the Earth sustainably, which is why it is not a cause for depression. It is a cause for inspiration to study these sustainable solutions and see if we can kind of turn the Titanic. So I would recommend, if you have not gone to this footprint calculator before, to do it, because I think it's the best way to understand your impact on the earth. It's going to ask you questions about, I never eat meat. It's going to ask you questions about what you eat. It's going to ask you how much you eat that's processed, unprocessed, or unpackaged, locally grown, getting at that sustainable agriculture. And to go through it, not to feel guilty, because they also provide solutions. So when you get through this whole thing, it'll give you a really good understanding of how that calculation is made, and it'll compare it. If you've never done it, I highly recommend it. You should go there. It will ask you a series of questions about your water use. How often do you shower? Do you wash your clothes? Transportation and calculating your carbon footprint, food choices, soil, housing, consumption patterns, how much stuff you buy, because producing all that stuff uses fossil fuels. And then they'll give you recommendations, and that recommendations is another great place to get ideas about what personal behaviors are sustainable. When you're making these ideas on solving problems, you've got to think about there are solutions we can ask people as individuals to do, but if we want systemic change, you've got to think about education or incentives, financial incentives for developing countries, or global agreements, like, for example, the Kyoto Protocol, right? Where and the Rio Earth Summit, where countries are getting together to try and encourage each other to do things like Costa Rica, which was to get rid of its army and decide they weren't going to use any fossil fuels anymore for anything. And they're making that transition. The average US citizen has a footprint that's 9.7 hectares. It's in the chat. What will we need to keep it at to be sustainable and leave things for our future? It's a lot less. It's a lot less. It's Earth Day, everybody. We're going to not be depressed about it, but we're going to act locally and think globally, right? Happy Earth Day, by the way. So, like I said, ecological footprints are a measure of individual choices. How often are these choices shaped? Thank you, Ria. Yeah, happy Earth Day, everybody. Woohoo! The Earth is happy today for sure. Air pollution's down. Saw a bald eagle yesterday, like in a tree on a street. Wildlife is loving this. You would need 4 planets. Okay, but the point isn't to feel bad about it. The point is to ask you, in your life right now, what individual choices would make it be more sustainable? And then we also have to think that our choices are shaped by our society and our culture. So how do we make a larger change? It's important to do things like, Greta she sailed across the ocean to talk to President Trump instead of taking an airplane to make a point, right? So she's trying to be an example to other people. But the point she was trying to make was to the UN and to the United States government that they need to take climate change seriously. So solutions need to happen not from a place of individual guilt, but from a place of global awareness. And that's why taking APES is like really important. For example, what accounts for ecological footprints from one country to the next being different? What do you guys think? So we're over here with 9 point something for average Americans. And if you're at 4 planets, that's less than the average American. And then we have really small ecological footprints. That is awesome. What do you think accounts for differences in ecological footprints? Anybody? This map should look familiar. It's just reversed, right? Yes, economics and education. Absolutely. Absolutely. And so I think I'm going to give you a little hint. I could be right, I could be wrong. If you do see population pyramids, they're going to be linked to ecological footprint. They're going to be linked to talking about those social human factors and how they impact sustainability. So yeah, income, population size, population density, urban development, how urban is a society, what people eat, energy use and fossil fuel dependency. Those are public transportation. These are social and economic factors that determine that ecological footprint. Why? Oh, I did this last time. Okay. So takeaways, this is the time to ask any burning questions. By all indicators, global patterns of resource use is sustainable or unsustainable? You should know that. That's right. Sustainable options for living do exist. For example, here is a green building. This is transit-oriented development. And they have gardens and things on their roof. Have some in your back pocket for the first FRQ in the exam. Most importantly, not just on a identify level, right? Identify one aspect of sustainable agriculture. I got it, intercropping. But be able to explain that on a deeper level. For example, if I said transit-oriented development, I need to also say why it's needed. I need to say why transit oriented development addresses those reasons. Explain who will implement it. I have to say the city council, we need to vote, and the city council needs to put aside money to specifically make laws that say that for every new big house they build, they have to build these. Okay, so how would it be done? And be able to justify why that's the best solution or why that would be effective. And I would practice doing it. Can you think of a way you personally could reduce your carbon footprint or your food footprint? It is Earth Day, and that's what I got. That's what I got for you guys. I would pick some things that you feel like you can really develop those explanations about why it's sustainable, why it's a good solution, what the problem is, why it's the best solution for that problem, who's going to do it, how they're going to do it. And you guys have been great. I hope this was helpful. Feedback's always appreciated, and happy Earth Day. You're welcome. Great to see you, and maybe I'll see you guys in another week or so. Save up your questions for me, and as always, you get more out of it. Good. You guys get more out of it when you ask questions. All right. Have a nice night. Happy Earth Day.